They said the hills could keep secrets, but the wind of the Ozarks never truly forgets. In 1912, when the world turned its back on Eliza Whitlock, it wasn't just a woman they buried, it was truth itself, shrouded in superstition and silence. Yet, as the years passed, her name refused to die. It whispered through the trees, drifted along the rivers, and lived in the uneasy dreams of those who condemned her. What if the haunting of Eliza Whitlock was never about ghosts at all, but about the conscience of a people who mistook fear for faith? Ozarks then were a land suspended between civilization and wilderness, where the air hung thick with pine resin and old superstitions, and where silence had its own voice. The people of those hills were carved from hardship. They lived close to the land, and their understanding of life and death was intertwined with the rhythms of nature. Yet beneath that rugged simplicity, something darker pulsed. It was a time when faith was unquestioned, but compassion was conditional, and when the boundaries between sin and sickness were drawn not by reason, but by fear. Eliza Whitlock, by all accounts, was a quiet woman, soft-spoken, pale, with eyes that some said seemed to look through people rather than at them. She lived with her husband, Thomas, and their 2 children in a weathered cabin on the edge of the woods. Their life was one of modest means, marked by isolation and silence. Yet it was precisely this silence that began to unnerve her neighbors. They spoke of strange cries carried by the wind at night, of lights flickering in her windows when the moon was gone, of her wandering barefoot near the river's edge long after midnight. Rumors grew, as they often do in small, fearful communities, and soon people began to whisper that something unholy lived in the Whitlock house. When tragedy struck, when Thomas and the children were found lifeless under mysterious circumstances, the whispers became accusations. Some said she poisoned them, others that she consorted with dark forces, but all agreed on one thing: Eliza was not like them. What truly horrified the town was not the deaths themselves, but the reflection they saw when they looked into Eliza's eyes. For she did not weep as they expected her to. She did not scream, nor did she plead for mercy. She sat still, silent, her face pale as ash, her eyes vacant and endless. To them, her composure was evidence of guilt, yet in truth it was something far more disturbing. It was the quiet recognition of how fragile the line between innocence and condemnation truly was. The townspeople needed an explanation, something tangible to hang their fear upon, and Eliza became the vessel for everything they could not understand. They called her cursed, perhaps even possessed, but beneath those words was a simpler, more primitive truth. She terrified them because she mirrored something buried deep within their own hearts. In their judgment of her, the people of the Ozarks revealed the oldest instinct of humankind, to create monsters when we cannot bear to face the monster within. Her silence became their nightmare, her strangeness their scapegoat. It was not justice they sought, but purification, a ritual cleansing of what they perceived as evil in their midst. They did not realize that in condemning her, they were merely condemning their own reflection. Eliza's story, when seen beyond the veil of superstition, was the collective shadow of a community that had lost its balance between faith and fear. Her supposed crimes were the symptoms of a deeper sickness, one that ran through the entire valley like a hidden current. Each villager who accused her, each man who pointed his finger and called her devil's kin, carried within him the very darkness he believed he was destroying. The tragedy of Eliza Whitlock lies in this projection, the timeless human need to expel inner guilt by externalizing it. The people of the Ozarks did not understand that their fear of her was a reflection of their own unspoken violence, jealousy, and moral decay. Her isolation was their own loneliness made visible, her perceived madness their own spiritual unrest. In trying to erase her, they tried to erase the part of themselves that frightened them most. The horrifying case of Eliza Whitlock was therefore not a story of a woman's crime, but of a community's blindness. The mob that gathered outside her home on that cold evening was not driven by righteousness, but by the unconscious terror of facing the mirror she held up to them. The flames they raised, the shouts they hurled, the trembling prayers they uttered, all were the expressions of people trying to silence the echoes within themselves. Eliza's stillness amidst their chaos became a symbol of something eternal. She represented the human soul caught between the instinct to hide from truth and the quiet awareness of what lies beneath the surface of morality. Her tragedy was not simply that she was accused, but that she was never understood. No one sought to know her dreams, her pain, or her visions. No one asked what grief might have haunted her before the deaths, or what despair might have settled over her in that lonely cabin. To them, mystery was dangerous, and the unknown had to be destroyed. But in doing so, they only deepened their own darkness. The case of Eliza Whitlock thus became the mirror of an age, a parable of how easily fear can corrupt judgment and how the collective mind can create horrors far greater than any individual sin. In 1912, in the quiet hills of Missouri, a woman was not just condemned by her neighbors, she was sacrificed to their denial. Her story reveals the timeless truth that evil, when denied within, will always find a body to inhabit without. And so, the true horror of Eliza's tale lies not in her alleged acts, but in what her condemnation unveiled. The fragile, trembling boundary between faith and madness, light and shadow, humanity and its own reflection. Eliza Whitlock's mind was a landscape of haunting visions, flickering dreams, and incomprehensible whispers that blurred the line between the physical and the spiritual. Those who encountered her during the months before the tragedy spoke of her eyes as windows into another world, eyes that saw what others denied, eyes that carried the heavy knowledge of something vast and unseen. The townspeople, steeped in rigid religion and superstition, could not comprehend the language of her suffering. They labeled it madness, possession, or curse. Yet within the mysterious realm of her mind, there was a deeper truth, one that spoke not of insanity, but of a soul torn open by forces greater than itself. Her visions were the symbols of an unconscious struggle that no one around her understood, the unvoiced trauma of generations of repression that found expression through her fragile, tormented psyche. Those who lived near the Whitlocks recalled how Eliza would wander through the woods at dawn, her hair unbound, murmuring softly to herself. Some said she spoke to the river as though it could answer her. Others swore she listened to the wind as if it whispered secrets. The superstitious townsfolk interpreted her actions as witchcraft or divine punishment. But beneath those fearful interpretations was the reality of a woman overwhelmed by dreams that intruded upon her waking life. She spoke once to the local midwife about a recurring dream in which serpents slithered through her garden, coiling around the roots of every plant until the earth itself began to move. She would wake gasping for air, convinced she could hear the rustle of scales beneath her bed. Another dream, she said, always followed. A woman shrouded in shadow who came to her with words that melted away like smoke, leaving behind only a lingering dread. To her community, these were signs of evil influence, but in truth they were the symbols of her own inner turmoil, representations of the conflict between the life she lived and the truth she could no longer suppress. In a time when women's voices were smothered beneath layers of obedience and moral restraint, Eliza's visions became a forbidden language of rebellion. They were the eruption of what had been silenced. Her marriage to Thomas Whitlock was not one of love, but of duty and fear, a union formed to preserve appearances rather than nurture affection. The suffocating expectations placed upon her left her spirit fractured. Her dreams of serpents were not simply nightmares, but metaphors for the repressed instincts coiling within her, instincts she was taught to fear. The shadowed woman who appeared in her dreams symbolized the part of herself that longed to speak, to live beyond the boundaries imposed upon her. Yet each morning she woke to the same cold reality: the cabin walls, the silence of her husband, the relentless judgment of the community. The more she tried to silence the voice within, the more it demanded to be heard. In time, the line between her inner world and the outer one blurred, and the people around her mistook the language of her dreams for madness. The town preacher, a man of rigid conviction, visited her once after the rumors began to spread. He found her sitting by the hearth, staring into the fire with an expression both sorrowful and serene. When he questioned her about her dreams, she spoke softly, saying, "The fire speaks to me, but its words are not of hell. They are of remembering." The preacher recoiled, declaring her words heretical. Yet Eliza was not speaking of sin or blasphemy. She was describing the awakening of something ancient within her, the remembering of emotions and truths long buried beneath the weight of social obedience. Her dreams were not curses, but revelations. They were her soul's attempt to reconcile the contradictions within her, the yearning for freedom against the chains of duty, the need for truth against the comfort of ignorance. The tragedy that followed, her husband's and children's deaths, was seen as the ultimate proof of her damnation. But for those willing to look deeper, the signs pointed not to evil, but to despair. Eliza's isolation had grown unbearable. The visions that once came in sleep began to intrude upon her waking hours. She claimed to see her husband's face dissolve into smoke, her children vanish into the river's reflection. Whether these were hallucinations born of a collapsing mind or symbolic manifestations of unbearable grief, no one will ever know. What is certain is that she was crying out for understanding in a language no one wanted to hear. Instead of compassion, she received condemnation. Instead of help, she was met with horror. The more she was misunderstood, the more her psyche fragmented. The town's refusal to acknowledge her suffering turned her visions into a curse, not because they were evil, but because she was made to believe they were. Eliza's mind became both her sanctuary and her prison. Within it, the shadows spoke truths the daylight could not bear. The serpents in her dreams were not instruments of destruction, but symbols of transformation, ancient emblems of rebirth, renewal, and hidden wisdom. Yet no one around her could see beyond their fear of sin. The woman who appeared in her visions was not a demon, but a reflection of Eliza's own unacknowledged self, the side of her that longed to rise from the ashes of silence. Every symbol, every whisper, every image that haunted her was an expression of a soul seeking to become whole in a world that demanded her fragmentation. But when a society fears what it cannot understand, it destroys what could have healed it. In her final days, Eliza spoke less of the visions and more of silence. She seemed to know that no words would redeem her in the eyes of those who had already decided her fate. Her inner world, rich with symbols and meanings, became a private sanctuary where she alone could dwell. And in that solitude, she reached an understanding that her persecutors could never achieve, that darkness and light were not enemies, but twin faces of the same truth. To those who judged her, she was a mad woman. To those who looked deeper, she was a mirror reflecting the unspoken sorrow of every silenced heart. The horrifying case of Eliza Whitlock was not a descent into madness, but an ascent into unbearable clarity, a woman's soul confronting what others refused to see and paying the price for revealing the dreams that dared to speak when silence was demanded. The landscape of the Missouri Ozarks in 1912 was more than a setting. It was a consciousness unto itself, breathing, watching, and shaping the people who lived within its shadow. The thick forests, tangled undergrowth, and winding rivers formed not only the physical boundaries of life, but also the emotional and spiritual boundaries of those who called it home. To understand Eliza Whitlock's tragedy, one must first understand this land. a place of haunting beauty and quiet cruelty, where the line between the natural and the supernatural was so thin that even the wind seemed capable of whispering human sorrows. The hills were ancient and unyielding, their soil dark with the memory of generations, and the people who inhabited them reflected that same hardness. Yet beneath their stoicism lay the trembling fear that nature was always just a breath away from reclaiming what it had lent them. For the Ozarks did not simply provide, they tested, they confined, they mirrored the hidden corners of the soul. In this wilderness, Eliza's life unfolded like a solitary echo. Her cabin stood at the edge of a forest so dense that daylight entered it hesitantly. The rustling of leaves, the creaking of the trees, and the murmuring of the river became the voices she lived with when human company grew distant. Nature, in its unfiltered state, became both her companion and her confessor. On certain nights, the sky would blaze open with lightning, and she would stand barefoot in the rain, staring at the mountains as though trying to read a message written in the storm. Those who saw her in such moments thought her unwell, yet she was perhaps more awake than any of them. She felt in her bones what they feared to admit, that the land was alive, that it listened, and that it responded. The Ozarks, in all their immensity, reflected the secret life of her mind, beautiful, chaotic, fertile, and haunted. To the townsfolk, the wilderness represented danger and temptation. They fenced their lands, cleared their fields, and built churches as though to defend themselves from the forest's encroaching will. The deeper the woods, the more they filled it with legends of witches, spirits, and cursed creatures. It was easier to name evil than to live with mystery. And so, when Eliza began to wander farther into the woods, speaking softly to the river or lingering among the pines, the people believed she was being seduced by the forest's spirits. In truth, she was seeking understanding in the only place that did not judge her. She had grown weary of human eyes that saw only sin and superstition. In the murmur of the river, she found the echo of her own heart. In the quiet weight of the trees, she sensed the truth that life and decay were not opposites, but partners in an eternal dance. The land itself seemed to conspire with her fate. On the morning her husband and children were found lifeless, mist hung thick over the valley. The river ran slow and gray, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. To the villagers, this stillness was an omen, a sign that something monstrous had occurred. Yet it might also be said that the land was mourning, for Eliza's tragedy was not an isolated act of horror, but part of a much larger pattern, a reflection of the collective imbalance between human beings and the natural world they sought to dominate. The Ozarks were not merely the backdrop to her story. They were the stage, the witness, and the mirror. The people feared the woods because they feared what the woods revealed, their smallness, their mortality, their dependence on forces they could neither name nor control. The deeper truth is that nature, in Eliza's world, was not indifferent but responsive. It absorbed the grief, the violence, and the longing of those who lived within it. Each tree seemed to remember. Each gust of wind carried echoes of pain. Eliza felt this intimately, and it was this sensitivity that set her apart. While others hardened themselves to survive, she listened, and in listening, she became both participant and victim. Her dreams of water and serpents, her sense of being watched, her feeling that the land itself was alive, all of these were expressions of a psyche attuned to the pulse of the world around her. But the villagers could not understand such awareness. To them, the land was something to be tamed, not understood. To feel its moods so deeply was, in their eyes, a sign of madness. There is a peculiar irony in how the same land that nourished their crops also nourished their fears. Every shadow between the trees became a hiding place for the unknown. When the preacher warned of the devil's work, people looked not to their hearts, but to the forest. When illness struck or livestock vanished, the blame fell upon whatever could not be explained. In this sense, the Ozarks were not only a landscape of earth and rock, but a landscape of projection. The darkness they saw in the woods was the same darkness they carried within themselves. Eliza's connection to nature threatened them because it reminded them of what they had tried so hard to forget, that beneath their rigid faith and daily labor lay the primal, untamed core of humanity, the part that listens to the wind and dreams in symbols. Eliza's tragedy thus became inevitable, not because she sinned, but because she was the embodiment of what the land itself had long been whispering, a truth about unity, decay, and renewal that the people were not ready to hear. Her communion with nature, her intuition, her strange serenity, all of these marked her as different in a community that valued conformity above understanding. When her family died and she was accused, the forest once again fell silent, as though complicit in her suffering. The people burned her house, believing they were purging evil, but in truth, they were only deepening their separation from the world that had once held them gently. Afterward, the valley remained quiet for years. The soil around the Whitlock property grew thick with weeds that no one dared to clear. Children were warned not to go near the place, for it was said the wind there still carried her whispers. Perhaps it did. Perhaps the land remembered, as it always does, the pain of those who lived too close to its heart. The Missouri Ozarks of 1912, with their shadowed hollows and endless woods, were not just witnesses to Eliza's fall. They were the mirrors that reflected the human soul in all its frailty, its longing, and its refusal to see that the wildness outside was never the true threat. The true wilderness lay within. The community that surrounded Eliza Whitlock was bound together by faith, fear, and the fragile illusion of moral order. The Missouri Ozarks of 1912 were a world where survival depended not only on labor and endurance, but also on belonging. To be part of the community was to be seen, to be accepted, and to be protected. To fall outside of its rigid norms was to invite suspicion and exile. The people of those hills lived under a constant weight of spiritual anxiety. They believed that sin could spread like a sickness, that evil was not merely a force, but a contagion. Every misfortune, failed crops, sudden illness, strange noises in the night, had to have a cause, and that cause was almost always human. When tragedy befell the Whitlock family, the community needed a culprit, someone to carry their collective guilt, their unacknowledged envy, and their repressed fears. Eliza became that vessel, not because of what she had done, but because of what she represented. Her silence, her strangeness, and her refusal to conform made her an easy target. Her condemnation was less about justice than about the preservation of order, the desperate attempt to define evil as something external so that it could be destroyed. It began subtly, with whispers. The neighbors noticed she no longer attended church, that her children were not seen playing in the fields, that her home was quiet even when smoke rose from its chimney. The preacher's wife said Eliza had been seen talking to herself in the woods, and by the following Sunday the congregation was already murmuring about witchcraft. Fear is an infection that spreads faster than truth. By the time the deaths occurred, Eliza had already been tried in the invisible court of public opinion. To them, her guilt was inevitable. Her difference made it so. The same people who once shared bread with her now crossed themselves when she passed. They spoke of protecting the town and purging sin, but beneath their words lay something far less righteous, the primal hunger to purify themselves through sacrifice. When they gathered outside her cabin, torches in hand, their faces were lit not only by flame but by something darker, the satisfaction of unity. For the first time in months, the people were of one mind, one purpose. They needed her to be guilty because her guilt confirmed their innocence. The logic of the mob is ancient. It thrives on the illusion that evil can be expelled from the collective by destroying one of its own. Yet, in truth, every accusation was an act of projection. The anger they hurled at Eliza was the anger they felt toward their own weakness, their own failures, their own secret desires. By condemning her, they were confessing without realizing it. She became the mirror of their collective shadow, the embodiment of everything they denied within themselves. The preacher's sermon on the Sunday after the tragedy revealed this blindness in its purest form. He spoke of cleansing the community, of light triumphing over darkness, of the Lord's wrath against those who consort with evil. The congregation nodded, wept, and shouted, "Amen," never once realizing that their fervor was not born of faith, but of fear. The more they condemned her, the safer they felt from their own inner chaos. The mob that destroyed Eliza was not acting as individuals, but as a single organism, moved by instinct rather than reason. This is the tragedy of collective fear. It erases conscience. Men who would never have harmed her alone found courage in the crowd, courage fed by the intoxication of shared hatred. Women who once envied her quiet strength now spat at her name. Even children were taught to speak her story as a warning. The ritual of accusation became their new form of worship, their twisted communion. In condemning her, they believed they were restoring order, but they were only deepening their blindness. Each act of judgment became a stone laid upon the altar of denial. The real evil that haunted the town was not in Eliza's dreams or her solitude. It was in their inability to face themselves. They feared her because she reminded them of what they were capable of when stripped of the masks of civility. The horror that they projected onto her was, in truth, the horror of their own nature. Every human heart contains both light and shadow, but when a community denies this balance, it begins to rot from within. The people of the Ozarks, in their zeal to purify, ensured that their darkness would live on, unacknowledged, festering, passed down through stories told around the fire to children who would grow up fearing what they did not understand. What made Eliza's case truly horrifying was the absence of doubt. Once the crowd decided she was guilty, no evidence could redeem her. No plea could soften their resolve. The more she remained silent, the more her silence was taken as proof. This is how the machinery of collective judgment operates. It feeds on certainty. It thrives on the simplicity of good versus evil. Doubt requires thought, and thought requires compassion. But compassion is impossible where fear reigns. The townspeople did not want truth, they wanted relief. They needed the illusion that evil could be named and burned, and so they burned her in spirit, even if they stopped short of taking her life by hand. Her home was reduced to ashes, her name cursed in prayer, her face remembered as a warning. Yet if one listens closely to the silence that followed, there is an unease that never left the valley. The people went on with their lives, plowing fields, raising children, singing hymns, but beneath the surface lingered a quiet dread. Some nights, the wind would shift in a way that reminded them of her voice. Some mornings, the mist would hang low, and the river would seem to murmur her name. Guilt has a way of haunting those who refuse to acknowledge it. The children of those who condemned her grew up with stories of the witch of the Ozarks, yet in their eyes flickered a question they could not articulate. What if she had been innocent? The older generation silenced such thoughts, but the land remembered, and so did the conscience buried deep within their bones. Eliza Whitlock's tragedy thus became a symbol of the eternal struggle between truth and fear. Her persecution revealed how easily morality can become a weapon when stripped of humility. The people who condemned her believed they were acting in righteousness, yet they were driven by the same darkness they sought to destroy. The need to label someone as evil is, more often than not, the refusal to confront the evil that dwells quietly within. The torches they raised to banish her shadow only illuminated their own. The community's reaction to Eliza was not a story of justice. It was a confession written in fire, a testimony to how a society can destroy its soul in the name of saving it. Eliza Whitlock's final days were steeped in silence. The kind of silence that does not merely exist in the absence of sound, but rather fills the air like a living presence. It was not the silence of peace or acceptance, but of exhaustion, a surrender to the weight of misunderstanding that had crushed her spirit. The small cabin that had once echoed with the laughter of her children and the murmuring of daily life had become a tomb long before the world declared her guilty. Her voice, once soft but steady, faded into whispers that no one cared to hear. The townspeople had already written her story, etched it in fear and superstition, and there was nothing she could say that would rewrite it. Each look, each whisper, each avoided glance was a reminder that truth no longer mattered. Perception had already condemned her. Yet within that suffocating silence, Eliza seemed to find a strange clarity, as though the stripping away of everything external, reputation, companionship, safety, had left only the bare essence of her being. Her calm in those final days unsettled the people even more, for they could not understand how someone accused of such horrors could look upon them without hatred or fear. Witnesses said her eyes were unearthly calm, yet what they called unnatural was, in truth, the reflection of a deeper understanding. When one has been cast out, when every word becomes a weapon against oneself, there is nothing left to lose except illusion. Eliza had come to see that truth in a world ruled by fear is not meant to be spoken aloud. She had spent her life trying to fit the mold expected of her: wife, mother, believer. But now, standing on the edge of ruin, she realized those roles had been prisons. What frightened her accusers was not her silence, but the quiet dignity that radiated from it. They mistook her calm for guilt, because it reminded them of something they could not bear to face: the power of acceptance in the face of their own blindness. Eliza's composure was not defiance, but transcendence. She had moved beyond the noise of accusation, beyond the clamor of moral certainty, into a stillness that few ever reach. In her last days, Eliza was visited by a few who still felt pity. The midwife, who had once held her children at birth, came one evening carrying bread and milk. She found Eliza sitting by the window, staring at the dying light. The woman asked softly if she feared what was to come, and Eliza replied, "Fear is for those who still hope to be understood." Her words, though simple, carried the weight of revelation. She no longer sought to defend herself because she knew the truth was not something that could be accepted by those blinded by their own righteousness. Her silence became her only weapon, her only form of purity. Each unspoken word held more truth than any argument could, for it stood as a mirror to the emptiness of the accusations around her. The transformation of Eliza's silence from submission to strength revealed the paradox of her tragedy. The more she was misunderstood, the more she became the vessel for something greater than herself, the unspoken pain of every soul that had ever been condemned for being different, for seeing too much, for feeling too deeply. Her stillness became a symbol of endurance, her isolation a testament to the power of inner knowing in a world addicted to fear. The people had stripped her of everything: her name, her home, her humanity. Yet in doing so, they had freed her from the illusions that bound them. While they clung to the fragile comfort of certainty, she embraced the terrifying freedom of truth. She saw clearly what they could not, that the monsters they feared were not in her dreams or her mind, but in their hearts. Her final night was said to be stormy, the wind thrashing against the cabin like a living thing. Some claimed to have seen a flicker of light through her window, though the lamps had been long extinguished. Others said they heard her singing, a low, mournful melody that carried over the hills. Whether that was imagination or truth, no one could ever say. What is certain is that by dawn, the storm had passed, and Eliza was gone. Some believed she fled into the forest, others whispered that the river took her. The preacher declared that her body would never be found because the earth itself refused to keep her. Yet the truth, perhaps, was simpler and more haunting. She had become one with the silence she had carried for so long. Her disappearance was her final act of freedom, a refusal to let them decide the terms of her end. The aftermath of her vanishing left the community uneasy. They had expected closure, a confession, a spectacle, some sign that justice had been served. But instead they were left with uncertainty, and uncertainty is the one thing a fearful mind cannot abide. Her absence became more powerful than her presence had ever been. The people spoke of her less, but they thought of her often. Some nights, the wind's sigh through the pines would carry her name. Children were warned not to wander near the river, where the mist was said to take her shape. Yet beneath their fear was guilt, the unspoken realization that they had destroyed something they could never truly understand. The mob that had gathered in self-righteous unity now found itself haunted by disquiet. They prayed louder, worked harder, spoke more often of God's justice, as if their words could drown out the echo of what they had done. In time, Eliza's story became a legend, a cautionary tale stripped of its humanity. She was remembered not as a woman, but as a symbol of warning, the witch, the cursed one, the woman who spoke to shadows. Yet even through distortion, truth survives. Her image lingered in dreams, her name whispered in guilt, her memory entwined with the land that had borne her suffering. To those rare souls who could feel beneath the surface of the legend, she became something else entirely, a figure of redemption, a martyr not for sin but for the courage to see what others would not. Her silence, misunderstood as surrender, was in truth an act of resistance more profound than any word could express. Eliza's calm eyes, her quiet endurance, her disappearance into the unknown, all of it formed a parable of the human condition. Her story was not only about a woman persecuted by her community, but about the eternal cycle of fear and projection that defines every age. When a society cannot bear to confront its shadow, it will always find someone to bear it for them. Eliza carried that burden until it consumed her, but in doing so, she became something more than a victim. She became the mirror of truth that no amount of fire or prayer could destroy. Her silence endures because it speaks the language of the soul, the language that cannot be silenced, even by death. For it is the voice that reminds us that understanding without compassion is blindness, and judgment without love is the truest form of evil. The legacy of Eliza Whitlock in the Missouri Ozarks did not end with her disappearance. In fact, that was only the beginning of her true existence. While the people who condemned her thought they had buried her memory beneath layers of fear and superstition, what they did instead was give birth to a myth that refused to die. Eliza's name became part of the land, stitched into the whispers of the hills and the silence of the forests. Children grew up hearing her story as a warning, but as the years went on, that warning took on new meanings. The tale shifted with each retelling, reflecting not truth, but the conscience of those who told it. Some said she was a witch who returned in the form of mist to curse those who wronged her. Others claimed she was a spirit of mercy, a guardian who appeared to those lost in grief. What had once been a story of judgment transformed into a story of haunting, and in that haunting lay a strange kind of justice. The people who had condemned Eliza lived with the unease of her memory. The preacher who had led the crowd against her was said to wake screaming in the night, muttering her name like a prayer and a curse. The midwife who had once pitied her claimed to hear Eliza's lullabies in her dreams, the same lullabies she had sung to her children before the world turned against her. Even the river, where they believed she had vanished, seemed to change. Its waters darker, its flow heavier, as though carrying the weight of her silence. The Ozarks, known for their serene beauty, grew heavy with superstition. Hunters spoke of seeing a woman's shape moving through the fog at dawn. Travelers who lost their way claimed to feel a hand guiding them toward safety. Whether these were mere stories or manifestations of guilt did not matter. What mattered was that the people could not escape her presence. She had become what they feared most, not a sinner, not a victim, but a truth that refused to be forgotten. Time, however, does not move in straight lines in places like the Ozarks. Memory seeps into the soil, into the trees, into the rhythm of the seasons. Decades later, when the old generation had turned to dust, new settlers arrived, unaware of the story that haunted the land. They built homes where Eliza's cabin had stood, tilled the earth, and planted new life. But even they began to feel something they could not name, a watchfulness, a quiet weight pressing against their dreams. Some said the land was cursed, others said it was sacred. They spoke of the strange sense of being observed, of whispers in the wind when no one else was near. The legend of Eliza Whitlock began to re-emerge, not through the sermons of preachers, but through the imaginations of poets, storytellers, and wanderers who felt that the land itself carried a consciousness, as if the soul of the wronged woman had merged with the world that betrayed her. The transformation of her memory revealed something far deeper than folklore. It showed how guilt evolves into myth and how truth, when suppressed, finds other ways to speak. Eliza's story became a mirror for the people of the Ozarks, reflecting their hidden fears and desires. Every generation projected onto her what they could not face within themselves. For the religious, she was the cautionary tale of sin and temptation. For the fearful, she was a spirit of vengeance. For the lonely and misunderstood, she became a symbol of endurance and quiet strength. In each version, a fragment of the real Eliza remained, a woman who had been destroyed not because she was evil, but because she saw beyond the illusions of her time. Her memory survived because it fulfilled a human need. The need to understand suffering, the need to find meaning in tragedy, the need to believe that even in ruin, something eternal can be born. There were those who felt drawn to her story not out of fear, but out of compassion. In the late 1930s, a school teacher from a nearby town began collecting the oral histories of the Ozarks. When she heard the tales of Eliza Whitlock, she became obsessed with finding the truth. She searched old court records, interviewed the descendants of those who had lived through that time, and even visited the remains of the cabin said to be Eliza's. What she found disturbed her. There were no official records of a trial, no proof of her death, only fragments of testimony and a deep collective silence. The teacher wrote in her journal that it felt as though the land itself conspired to keep Eliza's truth hidden. She described a feeling of presence near the ruins, an intelligence that listens. When she published her findings, she was criticized by the local church for reviving a story best left buried. Yet her work reignited the conversation, and for the first time people began to speak of Eliza not as a curse, but as a woman wronged by fear and ignorance. Her memory continued to evolve, shaped by the collective unconscious of those who remembered. In dreams and whispers, she became a symbol of the feminine soul that suffers beneath repression. She came to represent the wisdom of the unseen, the intuition that men fear and society suppresses. The land, once stained by judgment, became her sanctuary. Travelers who spent the night near her resting place often spoke of feeling profound peace, as though embraced by an unseen force. The myths of vengeance faded, replaced by stories of compassion. Those who had suffered loss or injustice found solace in her legend, believing she understood their pain. The ghost that had once terrified the Ozarks had become a spirit of healing. This transformation revealed an essential truth about human memory: that time does not erase trauma, but transforms it into meaning. Even now, more than a century later, Eliza Whitlock's presence lingers not as a phantom, but as an archetype. Her story has transcended history to become a metaphor for the eternal conflict between truth and conformity, light and shadow, understanding and fear. She represents the soul's journey through suffering toward wholeness, the descent into darkness that precedes illumination. The people who once condemned her have long vanished, but their fears live on in every age that punishes the one who sees differently, who feels too deeply, who refuses to conform. Eliza's silence speaks across generations, a whisper reminding us that every judgment we cast upon another reveals the parts of ourselves we cannot face. The Ozarks still hold her secret, not as a haunting, but as a promise, that truth, no matter how deeply buried, will always find a way to rise again. Her legacy is not of despair, but of awakening, the quiet, enduring light that grows from the depths of shadow and teaches us that the soul, though silenced, is never destroyed.